You talk every single day. You communicate with people. You share ideas. You make requests. You try to get things done. But here's the hard truth: most people are terrible at it. They're not terrible because they lack intelligence. They're terrible because they've never learned how to think clearly, speak powerfully, or influence effectively. And that costs them. It costs them opportunities. It costs them respect. It costs them the ability to lead, to inspire, to create real change in their lives and in the world around them. This isn't about becoming manipulative. This isn't about tricking people or playing games. This is about mastering the fundamental skills that separate those who merely exist from those who actually shape their reality. The ability to think with clarity, speak with conviction, and influence with integrity is not a gift you're born with. It's a skill you build. And if you're willing to do the work, if you're ready to face some uncomfortable truths about how you've been communicating, then you're about to transform the way you move through the world. Think about the people who command attention when they enter a room, the leaders who inspire teams, the speakers who move audiences, the negotiators who walk away with exactly what they want while making everyone else feel like they want to. What do they have that you don't? It's not magic, it's mastery. They've learned how to organize their thoughts in ways that cut through confusion. They've trained themselves to speak in ways that land with impact. They've studied the psychology of influence, and they use it ethically to create outcomes that serve everyone involved. Most people stumble through conversations without strategy. They react instead of respond. They talk without thinking. They try to persuade without understanding what actually moves people. And then they wonder why nobody listens, why their ideas go nowhere, why they can't seem to get through to anyone. The problem isn't the world, the problem is the approach. Here's what you need to understand: communication is the most powerful tool you have. It's how you build relationships, it's how you solve problems, it's how you create opportunities that don't exist yet. But like any tool, it's only as effective as the person using it. A hammer in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to swing it is worthless. A brilliant idea in the mind of someone who can't communicate it clearly goes nowhere. You could have the solution to every problem in your field, but if you can't articulate it in a way that resonates with others, it dies with you. This is your wake up call. You're about to learn how professional communicators think, how they structure arguments that are impossible to ignore, how they read a room and adapt their approach in real time, how they use their voice, their body, their presence to amplify their message, how they tap into the psychological triggers that make people say yes. But more importantly, you're going to learn how to do all of this with authenticity, with ethics, with the kind of integrity that builds trust instead of breaking it. We're going to start from the ground up. First, you will learn how to think like someone who influences others, because clear thinking is the foundation of clear communication. You can't convince anyone of something you haven't convinced yourself of first. Then we'll move into the mechanics of speaking, the verbal and nonverbal elements that transform ordinary conversations into moments of genuine connection and persuasion. Finally, we'll dive deep into the psychology of influence, the science backed principles that explain why people make the decisions they make, and how you can ethically guide those decisions in directions that serve everyone. This is not theory. This is practical knowledge you can use today. Every concept we cover, you can immediately apply in your next conversation, your next presentation, your next negotiation. But here's the catch: knowing isn't enough. You have to practice, you have to fail, you have to get feedback and adjust. The difference between someone who reads about communication and someone who actually becomes great at it is action. So as we move through this material, don't just listen, decide how you're going to use what you're learning. Decide which conversations you're going to approach differently. Decide to become the kind of person who doesn't just talk, but communicates with purpose and power. Let's get started. Before you can speak with power, you have to think with clarity. That's the part most people skip. They jump straight to tactics, to techniques, to what they should say and how they should say it. But all of that is worthless if the thinking behind it is muddled, if the logic doesn't hold, if the foundation is weak. Great communicators are great thinkers first. They've trained their minds to cut through noise, to identify what matters, to construct arguments that actually make sense. And that's where we start. Critical thinking is not something they teach you properly in school. You might have heard the term, you might think you know what it means, but most people are walking around with untrained minds. They accept information at face value. They let their emotions drive their conclusions. They fall for cognitive biases that distort their perception of reality. And then they wonder why their arguments fall flat, why nobody takes them seriously, why they can't seem to make a convincing case for anything. Here's what critical thinking actually means. It's the disciplined process of actively analyzing, evaluating, and synthesizing information to reach well-reasoned conclusions. It's about questioning assumptions, your own and everyone else's. It's about examining evidence with a skeptical eye. It's about applying logic and reason instead of just going with your gut. It's about being willing to change your mind when the facts don't support what you believed. Most people can't do this. They're too attached to being right. They're too invested in their existing beliefs. They'd rather defend a weak position than admit they were wrong and adopt a stronger one. But if you want to communicate like a professional, you have to be different. You have to be the person who cares more about truth than ego. You have to be willing to sit with a problem long enough to understand it from multiple angles. You have to develop the mental discipline to separate what you want to be true from what actually is true. This isn't easy. It requires constant vigilance, constant self correction, but it's the only way to build credibility. When you speak from a place of genuine understanding, people feel it, they trust it, they're more likely to be moved by it. One of the biggest obstacles to clear thinking is cognitive bias. These are systematic errors in judgment that affect everyone, including you. Confirmation bias makes you seek out information that supports what you already believe while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. Anchoring bias causes you to rely too heavily on the first piece of information you encounter. The availability heuristic leads you to overestimate the likelihood of events that come easily to mind, usually because they're recent or dramatic. These mental shortcuts helped our ancestors survive, but in the modern world, they sabotage sound decision making. Understanding your biases doesn't make you immune to them, but it does give you a fighting chance. When you catch yourself gravitating toward information that confirms your existing view, stop. Force yourself to seek out opposing perspectives. When you notice you're anchored to an initial number or idea, deliberately consider alternatives. When an emotionally charged example is dominating your thinking, step back and look at the broader data. This kind of metacognition, thinking about your thinking, is what separates reactive minds from strategic ones. Logical reasoning is the framework that holds your thinking together. There are two main types, deductive and inductive. Deductive reasoning starts with general principles and applies them to specific cases. If all humans are mortal and Socrates is human, then Socrates is mortal. It's airtight when the premises are true. Inductive reasoning works the opposite way, drawing general conclusions from specific observations. You've seen the sun rise every morning of your life, so you conclude it will rise tomorrow. It's not certain, but it's highly probable based on the evidence. Both forms of reasoning are essential, but both can go wrong. Deductive reasoning fails when your premises are faulty. Inductive reasoning fails when your sample size is too small or unrepresentative. This is where logical fallacies creep in, errors in reasoning that make arguments look convincing when they're actually flawed. The ad hominem attacks the person instead of the argument. The straw man distorts the opponent's position to make it easier to knock down. The false dichotomy presents only two options when more exist. Slippery slope assumes one action will inevitably lead to extreme consequences. Hasty generalization jumps to conclusions based on insufficient evidence. You need to be able to spot these fallacies in other people's arguments, but more importantly, you need to ruthlessly eliminate them from your own thinking. Every time you make a claim, ask yourself, is this actually logical? Or does it just feel right? Am I addressing the real argument, or am I attacking a weaker version? Am I presenting all the relevant options, or am I forcing a false choice? Am I making valid inferences, or am I jumping to conclusions? This kind of self-interrogation is uncomfortable, but it's how you build arguments that actually hold up under scrutiny. Mental clarity also requires focus. Your mind is constantly being pulled in 1,000 directions. Notifications, distractions, the endless stream of information competing for your attention. But deep thinking requires sustained concentration. You can't construct a solid argument while checking your phone every 30 seconds. You can't analyze a complex problem with half your brain. This means you need to create space for focused thought. Turn off the distractions. Sit with a problem long enough to actually understand it. Give yourself permission to think without interruption. There is also the matter of intellectual honesty. This is the willingness to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it's inconvenient, even when it contradicts what you want to believe. Most people don't have this. They start with a conclusion and work backwards, cherry picking facts that support it and dismissing everything else. But that's not thinking, that's rationalizing. And people can smell the difference. When you speak from a place of intellectual honesty, there's a weight to your words. When you're just defending a predetermined position, It rings hollow. One of the most powerful thinking tools you can develop is the ability to steelman arguments instead of strawmanning them. Strawmanning is taking the weakest version of someone's position and attacking that. Steelmanning is the opposite, taking the strongest version of an opposing argument, the most charitable interpretation, and engaging with that. This forces you to actually grapple with ideas instead of just dismissing them. It makes your own thinking sharper because you're testing it against the best counter arguments, not the worst. And when you eventually articulate your position, it's far more persuasive because you've already addressed the strongest objections. You also need to understand the difference between facts, interpretations, and opinions. Facts are verifiable. Interpretations are how we make sense of facts. Opinions are personal judgments. Most arguments fall apart because people treat their interpretations as facts and their opinions as universal truths. They say the data clearly shows, when what they really mean is here's how I interpret this data. They say everyone knows, when what they mean is I believe. Being precise with language, being clear about what you actually know versus what you think, builds credibility and makes your arguments harder to dismiss. Another critical skill is the ability to identify what's relevant and what's noise. Not all information is equally important. Not every detail matters. Part of thinking clearly is knowing what to focus on and what to filter out. This requires judgment, which comes from experience and practice. But the principle is simple. Always ask yourself, does this piece of information actually move me closer to understanding the truth, or is it just interesting? Does this factor genuinely impact the outcome, or am I getting lost in irrelevant details? Finally, clear thinking requires humility, the willingness to admit when you don't know something, the openness to being wrong, the recognition that your current understanding is always incomplete. Arrogance kills learning. It makes you defensive when you should be curious. It makes you cling to weak positions when you should be evolving. The best thinkers are the ones who stay in a state of productive uncertainty, confident enough to take a stand, but humble enough to change their minds when better evidence emerges. This foundation of clear thinking is what makes everything else possible. When you can organize your thoughts logically, when you can separate signal from noise, when you can construct arguments that actually hold up, then you have something worth communicating. Without this foundation, all the speaking techniques in the world won't help you. You'll just be delivering nonsense with confidence, and that's worse than saying nothing at all. Most people focus on how they communicate with others, but the most important communication you'll ever have is with yourself. The way you talk to yourself, the stories you tell yourself, the meaning you assign to events, all of this shapes your external communication in ways you probably don't realize. If your internal dialogue is chaotic, defensive, or self defeating, that's going to leak out in how you speak to others. If you can't regulate your own emotional state, you won't be able to maintain composure when a conversation gets tense. Mastering internal communication isn't just about feeling better, it's about performing better. Self awareness is the starting point. You need to understand your own patterns, your triggers, your blind spots. What situations make you defensive? What topics make you emotional? When do you tend to shut down versus when do you get aggressive? Most people have no idea. They just react over and over in the same ways without ever stepping back to examine why. But awareness creates choice. Once you notice the pattern, you can interrupt it. You can choose a different response. This requires honest self examination, not the kind where you beat yourself up, but the kind where you observe yourself with curiosity. When you're in a conversation and you feel yourself getting heated, pause for a second and ask, what's actually happening here? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? Is this response proportional to what's happening, or am I reacting to something deeper? Sometimes anger is just anger, but often it's hurt, or fear, or shame. Wearing a different mask, understanding the real emotion underneath gives you power over it. Emotional intelligence starts with being able to name what you're feeling. Sounds simple, but most people can't do it. They know they feel bad, but they can't distinguish between anxiety, frustration, disappointment, and anger. They're all just negative feelings, but precision matters. When you can accurately identify the emotion, you can address it appropriately. Anxiety needs reassurance or preparation. Frustration needs problem solving. Disappointment needs perspective. Anger might need expression, or it might need cooling off. Lumping them all together means you're using the wrong tool for the job. Managing your emotional state is a skill you can train. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about not letting them hijack your ability to think and communicate clearly. There are several techniques that work. Deep breathing literally activates your parasympathetic nervous system, pulling you out of fight or flight mode. Taking a pause before responding gives your prefrontal cortex time to catch up with your amygdala. Reframing the situation, asking yourself if there's another way to interpret what's happening, can shift your emotional response entirely. Your internal narrative has massive power. The story you tell yourself about who you are, what you're capable of, what's possible for you, all of this either expands or limits your effectiveness as a communicator. If you tell yourself you're not good at public speaking, you'll show up nervous and unprepared. And guess what? You'll perform poorly, confirming the story. If you tell yourself you're someone who thinks clearly under pressure, you'll approach high stakes conversations differently. You'll trust yourself more, and that confidence will change the outcome. But here's the thing about internal narratives: most of them are inherited, not chosen. They're based on what other people told you, what you experienced as a kid, patterns you picked up without even realizing it. You didn't sit down and consciously decide what kind of communicator you are, it just happened. So the question is, are you going to keep running someone else's programming, or are you going to write your own? You have the power to change the story. It takes conscious effort, but it's possible. Start by noticing the limiting beliefs when they show up. Then challenge them. Ask for evidence. Most of the time, you'll find the story is based on outdated information or a handful of experiences that don't represent your full capability. Another aspect of internal communication is how you process feedback and criticism. Most people are terrible at this. They either defend immediately, dismissing anything that doesn't match their self image, or they collapse under criticism, taking it as confirmation that they're worthless. Both responses are useless. The defensive person never learns, the collapsed person never acts. The mature approach is to listen without immediately reacting, to consider whether there's truth in what's being said, to separate useful feedback from unhelpful noise, and to integrate what's valuable while discarding what isn't. This requires emotional regulation. When someone criticizes you, your first instinct is to feel attacked. That's normal, but you don't have to act on that instinct. You can notice the defensiveness rising and choose not to let it drive your response. You can say to yourself, "This feels uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Let me actually think about what they're saying," instead of just protecting my ego. The shift from reactive to reflective is what allows you to grow. Your relationship with uncertainty also shows up in how you communicate externally. Some people can't tolerate not knowing. They fill every gap with assumptions. They speak with false confidence because admitting uncertainty feels like weakness. But here's the truth: the ability to sit with "I don't know" is a strength, not a weakness. It shows at the qual honesty. It shows that you're more interested in getting to the right answer than in appearing to have all the answers. And paradoxically, being willing to say "I don't know" when appropriate actually increases your credibility. People trust someone who knows the limits of their knowledge more than someone who pretends to know everything. Your internal state of stress and fatigue also impacts your communication. When you're exhausted, your emotional regulation goes out the window. You snap at people. You misinterpret neutral statements as attacks. You can't access your higher reasoning. This is why rest isn't just about feeling good. It's about performing well. If you're trying to have an important conversation or make a critical presentation when you're running on fumes, you're sabotaging yourself. Protect your energy. Recognize when you're not at your best and either postpone the conversation or be extra mindful of your state going in. Mindfulness, the practice of being present with what is, instead of lost in thoughts about what was or what might be, is incredibly valuable for communicators. Most people are half listening at best. They're thinking about what they're going to say next, or replaying something that happened earlier, or worrying about how they're being perceived. Meanwhile, they're missing what's actually happening in the conversation. When you practice being fully present, you pick up on things you would have missed. You notice the hesitation in someone's voice. You catch the shift in their body language. You hear what they're not saying. And that information allows you to respond more effectively. Building a strong internal foundation also means developing resilience. Not everything is going to go your way. You're going to say the wrong things sometimes. You're going to have conversations that go poorly. You're going to face rejection and disagreement. If every setback knocks you off balance for days, you're going to be ineffective. Resilience is the ability to process the disappointment, extract whatever lesson is there, and then move forward without carrying unnecessary baggage. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't let one bad outcome define your identity or dictate your future performance. Your internal communication also involves how you prepare mentally for important interactions. Professional athletes visualize their performance before the game. Surgeons mentally rehearse procedures. You can do the same for conversations that matter. Before a difficult discussion, run through it in your mind. Not to script every word, but to prepare yourself emotionally, to anticipate challenges, to decide how you want to show up. This kind of mental preparation gives you a massive advantage. You're not walking in cold, you're walking in ready. Finally, self compassion is part of this internal work. You're going to mess up. You're going to communicate poorly sometimes. You're going to let your emotions get the better of you. When that happens, beating yourself up doesn't help. It just creates more emotional noise that interferes with your ability to do better next time. Acknowledge what happened, learn from it, and move on. Treat yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend who made a mistake. This isn't about lowering standards. It's about creating an internal environment where growth is possible, instead of one where shame keeps you stuck. Mastering your internal communication gives you the stability and clarity to communicate effectively with others. When you know yourself, when you can regulate your emotions, when your internal narrative supports instead of sabotages you, everything becomes easier. You show up to conversations grounded instead of reactive. You speak from a place of confidence instead of insecurity. You listen with presence instead of distraction. This is the work that most people skip, but it's the work that makes everything else possible. Once you've built a foundation of clear thinking and internal awareness, the next step is learning how to structure your thoughts for maximum persuasive impact. This is where most people fail. They have good ideas, but they can't organize them in a way that's compelling. They know what they believe, but they can't articulate why in a way that moves others. The architecture of persuasive thinking is about building arguments that are logically sound, emotionally resonant, and strategically structured to bring people along with you. Rhetoric. The art of persuasion has been studied for thousands of years. Aristotle identified three fundamental appeals that still form the backbone of all persuasive communication: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is your credibility. Pathos is emotional appeal. Logos is logical argument. Every effective communication uses all three, though the balance shifts depending on context and audience. Understanding how to deploy each deliberately is what separates amateurs from professionals. Ethos. Your credibility is established before you even open your mouth. It comes from your reputation, your expertise, your track record, your character. But it's also built in real time through how you present yourself. Do you speak with confidence or uncertainty? Do you demonstrate knowledge or fake it? Do you admit when you don't know something or bluff your way through? People are constantly evaluating whether you're trustworthy, whether you're competent, whether they should take you seriously. Everything you do either builds or erodes your ethos. You can strengthen your ethos by citing credible sources, by demonstrating deep knowledge of your subject, by acknowledging the complexity of issues instead of oversimplifying, by being transparent about your limitations and uncertainties. You can also build ethos by aligning yourself with respected authorities or institutions, but this only works if it's genuine. If you're name dropping to impress rather than to provide relevant context, people see through it and your credibility drops. One critical but often overlooked aspect of ethos is consistency. If your words and actions don't match, if you say one thing and do another, you destroy your credibility faster than anything else. People need to know that what you say means something, that you stand behind your commitments. This is why integrity isn't just a moral virtue, it's a strategic asset. When people trust that you mean what you say, your words carry more weight. Pathos, the emotional appeal, is where you connect with what people care about, what they fear, what they hope for. Logic alone rarely changes minds. People need to feel something. They need to see how the issue affects them personally. They need to connect emotionally before they'll connect intellectually. This doesn't mean manipulation. It means understanding that humans are emotional beings and addressing that reality instead of pretending we're all pure logic machines. Effective pathos involves storytelling, vivid language, concrete examples, and empathy. When you tell a story about a real person affected by an issue, you make the abstract concrete. When you use sensory details that help people visualize a situation, you create emotional resonance. When you acknowledge people's fears and concerns instead of dismissing them, you build connection. The key is authenticity. If your emotional appeal feels manufactured or manipulative, it backfires spectacularly. There's a balance to strike with pathos. Too little, and your message feels cold and disconnected. Too much, and you seem hysterical or manipulative. The goal is to engage emotions in service of understanding, not to overwhelm reason with feeling. You want people to care enough to pay attention and think deeply, not to make decisions based purely on how they feel in the moment. Logos, the logical appeal, is the structure of your argument. the evidence you provide, the reasoning that connects your premises to your conclusions. This is where many arguments fall apart. People make claims without support. They use faulty reasoning. They ignore counter arguments. They present correlation as causation. Building a strong logical framework requires discipline and rigor. The Tolman model of argumentation provides a useful structure: claim, grounds, warrant, backing, qualifier, and rebuttal. Your claim is the position you're arguing for. Grounds are the evidence supporting it. The warrant is the reasoning that connects the evidence to the claim. Backing is additional support for the warrant if needed. The qualifier acknowledges limitations or conditions. The rebuttal addresses counterarguments. Most people only think about claim and grounds. They forget that even with good evidence, you need to explain why that evidence supports your conclusion. And they definitely forget to address counterarguments, which is a critical error. Addressing counterarguments doesn't weaken your position, it strengthens it. When you acknowledge the strongest objections and explain why they don't ultimately undermine your argument, you demonstrate that you've thought deeply about the issue. You show that your position can withstand scrutiny. You also prevent opponents from blindsiding you with objections you haven't considered. The most persuasive arguments are the ones that present both sides and then demonstrate why one is superior. Evidence quality matters enormously. Not all evidence is created equal. Anecdotes are useful for illustration, but weak for proof. Statistics are powerful, but can be misleading if taken out of context. Expert testimony carries weight, but only if the expert is truly credible in the relevant domain. Scientific studies are strong evidence, but need to be from reputable sources and properly interpreted. You need to develop judgment about what constitutes good evidence and be able to evaluate sources critically. One of the most powerful logical structures is cause and effect reasoning, but it's also one of the most commonly misused. Just because two things correlate doesn't mean one causes the other. Ice cream sales and drowning deaths both increase in summer, but ice cream doesn't cause drowning. The ability to distinguish genuine causal relationships from mere correlation is essential for sound argumentation. You need to consider alternative explanations, confounding variables, and whether the causal mechanism makes sense. Analogies and metaphors are useful rhetorical tools, but they're also risky. A good analogy can make a complex idea instantly clear. A bad analogy can distort understanding or reveal that you don't fully grasp the issue. The key is ensuring the analogy is actually parallel in the relevant ways. If you're comparing apples to oranges in areas that don't map onto each other, you're creating confusion instead of clarity. The classical structure of argumentation, developed by ancient rhetoricians, still works. Introduction that establishes relevance, narration that provides necessary background, confirmation that presents your argument and evidence, refutation that addresses counter-arguments, and conclusion that summarizes and calls to action. The structure works because it mirrors how people naturally process persuasive messages. You establish why they should care, give them the context they need, make your case with support, deal with objections, and then drive home the main point. But structure isn't one size fits all. Sometimes you need to lead with your strongest point to grab attention. Sometimes you need to build gradually, addressing objections first so people are receptive to your argument. Sometimes you need to start with common ground before introducing controversial claims. The key is being strategic about the order of information based on your audience and goals. Framing is another critical element of persuasive thinking. How you frame an issue shapes how people think about it. Is unemployment a personal failure or a systemic problem? Is climate change an environmental issue or an economic opportunity? Is immigration a security threat or a humanitarian imperative? The frame you choose activates different values, different emotional responses, different conclusions. Master communicators are very deliberate about framing. They don't just accept the dominant frame, they choose or create frames that support their position. You also need to understand the principle of common ground. You can't persuade someone from a position they don't accept. You need to start where they are, identify values or facts you both agree on, and then build from there. If you ignore where your audience is starting from and just hammer them with your perspective, they'll reject everything you say. But if you begin with "we both agree that X is important," you create a foundation for moving forward together. Persuasive thinking also involves anticipating questions and objections. What's the first thing someone skeptical will ask? What counterexamples will they bring up? What assumptions might they not share? If you can predict these and address them proactively, you maintain control of the conversation. If you're caught flat-footed by obvious objections, you lose credibility. Finally, clarity is persuasive. Complexity is not. Too many people think that using big words and convoluted sentences makes them sound smart. It doesn't. It makes them sound like they're trying too hard or hiding something. The goal is to make complex ideas accessible, not to make simple ideas sound complicated. If you can't explain your position clearly and simply, you probably don't understand it well enough. Work on distilling your arguments to their essence. The architecture of persuasive thinking is about intentionality. You're not just rambling or hoping for the best. You're deliberately structuring your arguments to maximize clarity, credibility, and emotional resonance. You're anticipating objections, providing solid evidence, and using rhetorical tools strategically. This is how you go from having opinions to making arguments that actually change minds. Having clear thoughts and persuasive arguments is useless if you can't articulate them effectively. The verbal component of communication is where ideas become reality, where what's in your head becomes shared understanding in someone else's. And most people are shockingly bad at it. They mumble, they ramble, they use filler words constantly, they speak in abstractions instead of specifics, they drone on in monotone, they fail to adjust their language for their audience. Every one of these problems is fixable, but first you have to recognize that how you speak matters just as much as what you say. Clarity starts with word choice. Are you using the simplest, most precise language for the situation? Or are you reaching for impressive sounding words that actually muddy meaning? There's a time for technical language when you're speaking to experts who share your vocabulary. But most of the time, simpler is better. Don't say utilize when use works. Don't say facilitate when help is clearer. Don't use jargon unless your audience knows it and it genuinely adds precision. Every unnecessary layer of complexity is a barrier between you and understanding. Precision matters enormously. Vague language creates vague thinking. When you say we should improve performance, what does that actually mean? Performance of what? Improved how? By how much? By when? Specificity gives people something concrete to work with. We need to reduce customer wait times from an average of 5 minutes to under 2 minutes by the end of Q2 is something people can actually respond to and act on. Vague goals and vague language lead nowhere. The structure of your sentences also affects how well you're understood. Short sentences are easier to process than long ones. Active voice is clearer than passive. The committee approved the proposal is stronger than the proposal was approved by the committee. Subject verb object is the default structure for a reason. It's how our brains naturally process information. When you get fancy with your syntax, you make people work harder to follow you. Sometimes that's worth it for rhythm or emphasis, but most of the time, clear and direct wins. Vocal variety is what keeps people engaged. If you speak in monotone, you're putting your audience to sleep no matter how interesting your content is. Your voice is an instrument. Variation in pitch, pace, volume, and tone conveys meaning and maintains attention. When you're making an important point, slow down and let it land. When you're building to a conclusion, increase your energy. When you're sharing something surprising, let your voice reflect that. A flat delivery makes everything sound equally unimportant. Pauses are one of the most underused tools in verbal communication. Most people are terrified of silence, so they fill every gap with words, or worse, with filler sounds. All like, these don't make you sound thoughtful. They make you sound unprepared, but a deliberate pause after a question, after a key point, before a transition, that communicates confidence. It gives your audience time to process. It creates emphasis. It shows you're thinking, not just reciting. Learn to be comfortable with a beat of silence. It's powerful. Pacing is the speed at which you speak, and it needs to match your purpose and your audience. If you're explaining something complex, slow down, give people time to follow. If you're telling a story or building excitement, you can pick up the pace. If your audience is tired, varying your pace keeps them alert. Most people speak too quickly when they're nervous, rushing through their words like they're trying to get it over with. This makes you harder to understand and signals anxiety. Deliberately slowing down projects confidence and ensures clarity. Enunciation matters more than most people realize. If you mumble, if you swallow the ends of words, if your pronunciation is sloppy, people have to work to understand you. That's cognitive load they could be using to engage with your ideas. Clear articulation doesn't mean being stuffy or overly formal. It just means speaking clearly enough that people don't have to strain to hear you. Practice saying your words fully, especially consonants at the end of words. It makes an enormous difference. Volume needs to be appropriate for the setting and the message. Too soft and people can't hear you. which signals either that you don't think what you're saying is important or that you lack confidence. Too loud and you come across as aggressive or lacking awareness. But strategic variation in volume is powerful. Dropping your voice can actually draw people in, making them lean forward to hear. Increasing volume emphasizes importance. The key is intentionality, not just speaking at one consistent volume throughout. The language you choose needs to fit your audience. Speaking to executives requires different language than speaking to frontline employees. Speaking to experts in your field is different from speaking to the general public. You need to gauge their existing knowledge, their interests, their values, and adjust accordingly. This doesn't mean talking down to anyone, it means meeting people where they are. If you're using terminology they don't understand, you're not communicating effectively. If you're explaining things they already know, you're wasting their time and insulting their intelligence. Storytelling is one of the most powerful verbal techniques available. Facts are important, but stories are memorable. Stories create emotional connection. They make abstract concepts concrete. They give people a narrative framework for understanding information. When you can illustrate your point with a relevant story, you're far more likely to land a message than if you just state facts. The story doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be specific, authentic, and relevant to the point you're making. The language of confidence versus the language of uncertainty makes a massive difference in how you're perceived. I think maybe we should consider possibly looking into this, if we should investigate this. The first is hedging so much it sounds like you don't even believe your own suggestion. The second is direct and clear. Now, there are times when qualifying statements is appropriate. If you genuinely don't know, say so. But constant hedging, constant qualifiers, constant apologies for taking up space, these undermine your authority and make people less likely to take you seriously. Questions are another key tool in verbal communication, and most people use them poorly. Close ended questions get yes no answers. Open ended questions invite elaboration. Leading questions push toward a particular answer. Socratic questions make people think through implications. Knowing which type to use when is critical. If you want information, ask open ended questions. If you want commitment, ask close ended ones. If you want someone to discover a contradiction in their thinking, use Socratic questions that guide them there. Questions are not just for gathering information, they're for guiding thought and shaping conversations. Repetition, when used strategically, drives points home. Repeating a key phrase makes it memorable. Parallel structure, where you repeat a grammatical pattern, creates rhythm and emphasis. We will not be deterred. We will not be discouraged. We will not give up. The repetition of structure reinforces the message, but overdone, repetition becomes annoying or manipulative. The key is using it for your most important points, not everything. Concrete language always beats abstract language. Don't say we need to optimize our processes. Say we need to cut approval time from 3 weeks to 3 days. Don't say customer satisfaction is a priority. Say we're going to answer every customer email within 2 hours. Concrete details give people something to visualize, something to measure, something to act on. Abstract language sounds important, but means nothing. The ability to adapt your verbal style in real time is what separates good communicators from great ones. You notice your audience is confused, so you rephrase. You see they're losing interest, so you shift gears with a story or a question. You sense tension, so you acknowledge it directly instead of talking around it. This flexibility requires paying attention to feedback, verbal and nonverbal, and being willing to adjust course mid conversation instead of rigidly sticking to your plan. Finally, authenticity in your verbal communication matters more than perfect technique. People can sense when you're being genuine versus when you're performing. If your language doesn't match who you are, if you're trying to sound like someone else, it comes across as fake. Find your voice, use language that feels natural to you while still being clear and effective. The goal isn't to sound like a polished robot. The goal is to communicate your ideas as clearly and compellingly as possible while still sounding like yourself. Words are only part of the story. In fact, research suggests that in face to face communication, the majority of your message comes not from your words, but from how you say them and what your body is doing while you say them. Your body language, your facial expressions, your posture, your gestures, your eye contact, all of this is communicating whether you realize it or not, and most people are completely unaware of what their nonverbal communication is saying. They focus entirely on their words while their body undermines every point they're trying to make. Posture is the foundation. Before you say a word, people are making judgments about you based on how you hold your body. Slouching signals low energy, insecurity, disengagement. Standing or sitting upright, shoulders back, head level. This signals confidence, alertness, authority. It's not about being rigid or military, it's about occupying space with intention. When you collapse your posture, you're making yourself smaller. When you expand, when you take up appropriate space, you're signaling that you belong there, that what you have to say matters. Interestingly, your posture doesn't just affect how others see you, it affects how you feel about yourself. This is called embodied cognition. When you adopt a confident posture, you actually start to feel more confident. When you hunch over, you feel less powerful. So, working on your posture isn't just about appearance, it's about putting yourself in the right state to communicate effectively. Before important conversations, spend a minute standing in an expansive posture. It genuinely helps. Eye contact is perhaps the most powerful nonverbal tool you have, and it's where most people fail spectacularly. Too little eye contact and you seem shifty, uncertain, untrustworthy. Too much and you come across as aggressive or creepy. The balance varies by culture, but in most Western contexts, holding eye contact while making a point, breaking briefly while listening, and reconnecting at key moments is the pattern that builds connection and credibility. When speaking to a group, don't just scan over everyone. Actually make eye contact with individuals, holding it for a complete thought before moving on. This creates connection with each person and makes your message feel personal, even in a large setting. It's the difference between talking at people and talking with people. Many speakers stare at a spot above everyone's heads or look at their slides. This instantly breaks connection. Facial expressions need to match your message. If you're talking about a serious problem with a smile on your face, people don't know what to believe. If you're delivering good news with a flat expression, it doesn't land. Your face should reflect and amplify the emotional content of what you're saying. This doesn't mean exaggerating or being theatrical, it means being congruent. What your face shows should align with what your words say. A genuine smile, called a Duchenne smile, engages the muscles around your eyes, not just your mouth. People can tell the difference between a real smile and a fake one, even if they're not consciously aware of it. A fake smile creates distance. A genuine smile builds warmth and connection. The same goes for other expressions. Authenticity is more important than perfection. People respond to genuine emotion, even if it's negative, better than to polish fakeness. Gestures can emphasize and clarify your message, or they can be distracting noise. Purposeful gestures that illustrate what you're saying, showing size, direction, connection. These add to your message. Random, repetitive, or nervous gestures pull attention away from your words. Hand movements should be deliberate and match your content. If you're talking about growth, an upward gesture reinforces it. If you're talking about bringing people together, a gathering gesture supports it. Many people don't know what to do with their hands when speaking, so they fidget, put them in pockets, cross their arms, or grip a lectern. None of these work. The neutral position is hands at your sides or relaxed in front of you. It feels awkward at first, but it looks natural to observers. From there, you can gesture when it serves your message. If you're not sure what to do, less is more. No gesture is better than a distracting one. Proxemics, the study of personal space, affects how comfortable people feel with you. Stand too close, and you're invading their space, making them defensive. Stand too far, and you seem distant or disengaged. The appropriate distance varies by relationship and culture, but generally intimate conversations happen at closer range, professional conversations at medium range, public speaking at greater distance. Being aware of spatial dynamics and respecting boundaries builds trust. Movement and stillness both have strategic value. Pacing can signal nervousness or energy. Standing still can signal confidence or create emphasis. The key is intentionality. If you're moving, it should be purposeful, to shift attention, to transition between topics, to engage different parts of an audience. If you're still, it should be to create focus, to let a point land, to show control. Random unconscious movement is distracting. Planted purposeful stillness is powerful. Your breathing is visible, especially in high stakes situations, and it affects everything else. Shallow, rapid breathing signals anxiety and makes you feel more anxious. Deep, controlled breathing calms your nervous system, steadies your voice, and projects calm confidence. Before important communications, focus on your breath. During them, especially if you feel yourself getting stressed, a deep breath recenters you. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly effective. Mirroring, subtly matching someone's body language builds rapport. When you mirror someone's posture, gestures, or energy level, you create unconscious connection. They feel like you're on the same wavelength. This isn't about being obvious or mimicking everything. It's about being attuned enough to naturally fall into sync. When there's rapport, mirroring happens automatically. When there isn't, consciously mirroring can help build it. Congruence between your verbal and nonverbal communication is critical. If your words say one thing and your body says another, people believe your body. You can say, I'm totally open to feedback while crossing your arms and frowning, and no one will believe you. You can say, this is really important while looking at your phone, and people will know it's not. Your body can't lie the way your words can, so alignment between what you say and how you show up is essential for credibility. Nervous habits reveal themselves in your nonverbal communication. Fidgeting, pen clicking, hair touching, leg bouncing, all of these signal discomfort or lack of confidence. Most people are completely unaware they're doing them. Video record yourself speaking and watch for these tells. Once you're aware, you can work on eliminating them. This doesn't mean being stiff. It means channeling nervous energy into purposeful movement instead of leaking it through distracting behaviors. Your clothing and appearance are also part of nonverbal communication. Like it or not, people make judgments based on how you present yourself. This doesn't mean you need to wear a suit everywhere, but it does mean being intentional about your appearance for the context. If you're speaking to a corporate audience in shorts and a t shirt, you're creating resistance before you open your mouth. If you're trying to connect with a casual team while wearing a three-piece suit, you're building distance. Match the context while still being yourself. Physical presence is the cumulative effect of all these elements working together. It's that quality some people have where they walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. It comes from confidence, from alignment between who you are and how you present, from being fully present rather than distracted or anxious. You can develop this. It's not a mystical gift. It's the result of being comfortable in your body, clear about your message, and fully engaged with the moment. Finally, awareness is the foundation of improvement. Most people have no idea what their body is communicating because they're so focused on their words. Record yourself, ask for feedback, pay attention to how you feel in your body during different types of interactions. Notice what happens to your posture when you're confident versus nervous, to your gestures when you're passionate versus unsure. This awareness allows you to make adjustments and develop nonverbal habits that support rather than undermine your communication. The smartest people in the room aren't always the most effective communicators. Technical knowledge, brilliant ideas, impeccable logic, none of that matters if you can't read the emotional temperature of a conversation, if you can't sense what's not being said, if you can't adapt your approach based on how people are actually responding to you. This is where emotional intelligence comes in, and it's what separates technically competent communicators from truly influential ones. Emotional intelligence in communication starts with empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. Not sympathy, which is feeling sorry for someone, not agreement, which is sharing their opinion. Empathy is the capacity to see the world from their perspective, to understand why they feel what they feel, even if you would feel differently in their position. Without this, you're just projecting your own experience onto everyone else, and your communication will consistently miss the mark. Developing empathy requires active curiosity about other people's experiences. You can't be empathetic while making assumptions. You have to actually ask questions, listen to the answers, and work to understand the internal logic of their position. Even when you disagree, even when their position seems obviously wrong to you, there is a reason they believe what they believe. Understanding that reason is the key to connecting and ultimately to influencing. Reading emotional cues is a skill most people never develop. Someone says, I'm fine, but their voice is tight and their shoulders are tense. They claim to be on board with a decision while sitting with crossed arms and a clenched jaw. Their words say yes, but every other signal says no. If you're only listening to words, you're missing most of the communication. Learning to attend to tone, body language, facial expressions, energy level, this gives you a much fuller picture of what's really happening. This doesn't mean you interrogate every little signal or assume you know what people are feeling. Reading emotional cues is about noticing patterns and testing hypotheses, not jumping to conclusions. You might notice someone seems uncomfortable and gently check in. You look like you might have some concerns about this. Am I reading that right? This gives them an opening to clarify without you assuming you know their internal state. Managing your own emotions in communication is just as important as reading others. When you let your emotions hijack the conversation, when you react defensively or aggressively, when you shut down or explode, you lose the ability to communicate effectively. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion or pretending to be a robot. It means recognizing when you're triggered and choosing how to respond instead of just reacting. Self-regulation is the capacity to pause between stimulus and response, to choose your reaction instead of being controlled by it. Someone says something that irritates you. The reactive response is to snap back. The emotionally intelligent response is to notice the irritation, take a breath, and decide how you actually want to handle this. Maybe addressing it directly is appropriate. Maybe letting it go is smarter. Maybe asking a clarifying question reveals that you misunderstood. The point is, you're choosing instead of reacting. Building rapport is the foundation of productive communication, and it's built through emotional attunement. When you match someone's energy level, when you validate their concerns before addressing them, when you find genuine common ground, you create a sense of connection that makes everything else easier. People are more open to influence from someone they feel connected to. They're more willing to be vulnerable, to share information, to collaborate. Rapport isn't manipulation, it's creating the emotional safety that allows real communication to happen. Difficult conversations are where emotional intelligence matters most. These are the conversations people avoid, the ones that make you uncomfortable, where there's conflict or bad news or feedback that's hard to hear. Most people handle these poorly. They avoid them until they explode. They go in aggressively, putting people on the defensive. They sugarcoat to the point where the message doesn't land. The emotionally intelligent approach is direct but compassionate, clear but respectful. The framework for difficult conversations is simple but powerful. Start by establishing your positive intent. You're having this conversation because you care about the relationship, the project, the person's success, not because you want to attack. State the facts objectively without interpretation. You've been late to 3 meetings this week is a fact. You don't respect other people's time is an interpretation. Share your concern or the impact. Listen to their perspective without interrupting. Work together on a solution. This approach addresses the issue while preserving dignity and relationship. Active listening is perhaps the most underused skill in communication. Most people aren't really listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk, or planning their response, or judging what's being said. Real listening is fully focused attention on understanding the other person's meaning. It means putting aside your agenda long enough to actually hear theirs. It means asking clarifying questions. It means paraphrasing to confirm understanding. It means noticing not just what's said, but how it's said and what might be left unsaid. When you listen actively, people feel heard. That alone shifts the dynamic of a conversation. It builds trust. It lowers defensiveness. It creates space for real dialogue instead of two people talking past each other. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to convince and start trying to understand, you often become more persuasive. People are more open to your perspective after they feel you've genuinely heard theirs. Validation is different from agreement. You can validate someone's feeling without agreeing with their conclusion. I can see why you'd be frustrated by that. Doesn't mean you think their frustration is justified by the facts. It just means you recognize that from their perspective, frustration makes sense. This simple acknowledgement dramatically reduces defensiveness. When people feel their emotions are recognized, they're more able to engage rationally. When they feel dismissed, they dig in harder. Dealing with strong emotions in others requires staying calm yourself. If someone is angry or upset and you match their intensity, you escalate. If you stay grounded, you become an anchor they can stabilize against. This doesn't mean being cold or dismissive. It means being present and calm while they process. Sometimes people just need to vent, and the best thing you can do is let them get it out without making it worse. That said, you also need boundaries. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean being a punching bag. If someone crosses a line, you can calmly but firmly address it. I want to hear your concerns, but I'm not okay with being spoken to that way. Can we take a breath and try again? This maintains respect for both parties while keeping the conversation productive. Motivation, understanding what drives people, is key to influencing behavior. Different people are motivated by different things. Some care about status and recognition. Some care about mastery and excellence. Some care about relationships and harmony. Some care about autonomy and freedom. If you're trying to influence someone and you don't understand what motivates them, you're guessing. But if you pay attention, if you ask questions and listen to what they value, you can frame your message in terms that actually resonate with their drivers. Emotional intelligence also involves cultural sensitivity. Different cultures have different norms around emotional expression, directness, hierarchy, conflict. What's considered assertive in one culture might be aggressive in another. What's polite deference in one might seem weak in another. Being emotionally intelligent across cultures means being humble enough to recognize that your norms aren't universal and curious enough to learn what's appropriate in different contexts. Finally, developing emotional intelligence is an ongoing process. You don't master it, and then you're done. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice, to notice, to learn. The more diverse your interactions, the more context you navigate, the more you develop this capacity. Seek feedback, pay attention to what works and what doesn't, be willing to adapt. The return on investment is enormous. Emotional intelligence is what turns communication from a mechanical exchange of information into genuine human connection that creates understanding and drives results. Understanding how people make decisions and what drives behavior change is essential if you want to be influential. This isn't about manipulation or trickery. It's about understanding the psychological principles that govern how humans process information and make choices, and using that understanding ethically to guide people toward decisions that serve everyone involved. Dr. Robert Cialdini's research on persuasion has identified six core principles that consistently influence human behavior across contexts and cultures. Mastering these gives you a massive advantage in any situation where you need to move people to action. The first principle is reciprocity. Humans have a deep seated drive to return favors and repay debts. When someone does something for you, you feel obligated to do something for them. This isn't learned behavior, it's hardwired. Societies that practice reciprocity survive better than those that didn't, so it became part of our psychological DNA. In practice, this means that giving first before asking for anything creates a sense of obligation that makes people more likely to help you when you need it. The key is that the favor has to be genuine, personalized, and unexpected. If it feels like a quid pro quo, if it's obviously calculated, it doesn't work. But a genuine kindness, a helpful gesture with no strings attached, creates real goodwill. This doesn't mean you manipulate people with fake favors. It means you build relationships through genuine generosity, understanding that this creates a foundation of mutual support. In professional contexts, reciprocity shows up in small ways. You share useful information with a colleague with no expectation of return. Later, when you need their help on a project, they're far more willing to assist. You make a concession in a negotiation. The other party feels compelled to reciprocate. The principle is simple but powerful. Be the first to give and make what you give personal and meaningful. The second principle is commitment and consistency. Once people make a choice or take a stand, they experience psychological pressure to behave consistently with that commitment. We need to see ourselves as consistent, so we align our future actions with our past decisions, even when it might not serve us. This is why getting small commitments early makes larger commitments easier later. If you can get someone to agree to a small request, they're more likely to agree to a larger one that's consistent with the first. The classic example is activism. Getting someone to sign a petition makes them more likely to donate money to the cause. They've identified themselves as someone who cares about this issue. Acting consistently with that identity becomes important to them. For this to work ethically, the initial commitment has to be voluntary, active, and public. Voluntary means no coercion. Active means they took an action, not just agreed passively. Public means others know about it, which increases the pressure to follow through. You use this principle when you ask for a small commitment that's aligned with the larger goal you're working toward. You get buy-in in stages rather than asking for everything at once. The third principle is social proof. When we're uncertain about what to do, we look to what others are doing. If everyone else is doing it, it must be the right choice. This is especially powerful when the others are similar to us. We're more influenced by people we identify with than by random strangers. This principle explains why testimonials work, why ratings matter, why showing that others have chosen your option makes people more likely to choose it too. In practice, you leverage social proof by making popularity visible. Instead of just saying your service is good, you show how many people use it. Instead of just claiming your idea has merit, you demonstrate how many respected peers support it. But this only works if it's true. Fake social proof manufacture testimonials, inflated numbers. These backfire catastrophically when discovered. Authentic social proof is powerful precisely because it's genuine validation from real people. The fourth principle is liking. We're more influenced by people we like, and we like people who are similar to us, who pay us genuine compliments, and who cooperate with us toward mutual goals. This isn't superficial, it's about building real connection. Similarity creates comfort, compliments create warmth, cooperation creates partnership. All of these make influence easier because trust and affinity are already established. This doesn't mean faking similarity or giving insincere compliments. It means genuinely looking for common ground, authentically appreciating people's strengths, and framing interactions as collaborative rather than adversarial. When you approach influence as us working together to solve a problem rather than me trying to get you to do what I want, the dynamic changes completely. The fifth principle is authority. We're inclined to follow the lead of credible experts. This makes sense evolutionarily. Learning from those with more knowledge or experience kept us alive. In modern contexts, it means that demonstrated expertise significantly increases influence. But authority isn't just about credentials, it's about demonstrated competence, consistent reliability, and visible expertise. You can leverage this principle by establishing your credentials up front, by demonstrating knowledge through how you speak, by citing authoritative sources, by being introduced by someone who vouches for your expertise. But you can also undermine it by overstating your expertise, by faking knowledge you don't have, or by being inconsistent. Authority is earned and maintained through reliable competence. The sixth principle is scarcity. Opportunities seem more valuable when they're less available. This is why limited time offers work, why exclusive access is appealing, why we want what's rare more than what's abundant. The fear of missing out is a powerful motivator. We hate losing opportunities more than we love gaining them, so scarcity drives action. Ethically using scarcity means being honest about limitations. If there genuinely are limited spots, limited time, limited availability, communicating that creates urgency. But artificial scarcity, fake deadlines, manufactured limits, these are manipulative and damage trust. The principle works best when you're transparent about what's actually scarce and why. I can only take on 2 more clients this month is legitimate if it's true. This offer expires tomorrow is manipulative if you run the same offer every week. Beyond these six principles, there are other psychological factors that influence decisions. Loss aversion means people are more motivated to avoid losses than to gain equivalent rewards. Frame an argument in terms of what they'll lose by not acting, and it's more compelling than framing it in terms of what they'll gain. Anchoring means the first number mentioned in a negotiation disproportionately influences the final outcome. Going first with an aggressive but defensible anchor shifts the entire negotiation range. The contrast principle means we evaluate things relative to what we just saw, not in absolute terms. A mediocre option looks great after a terrible one, and a good option looks less appealing after an excellent one. This is why salespeople show you the worst option first. It makes the middle option look better by comparison. Understanding this lets you be strategic about the order you present information. Decision fatigue means people make worse decisions as they make more decisions. Their mental resources deplete. This is why important decisions should come when people are fresh, and why simplifying choices makes it easier for people to commit. Too many options creates paralysis. Curating down to 2 or 3 strong choices makes decision making easier and action more likely. The endowment effect means people value things they already own more than identical things they don't own. Get someone to try your product, to use your service, to adopt your process, even temporarily, and they're more likely to keep it because giving it up feels like a loss. Free trials work because of the endowment effect combined with loss aversion. All of these principles work because they tap into how the human brain actually makes decisions. We like to think we're perfectly rational, weighing all options objectively and choosing the optimal path, but we're not. We use shortcuts, we're influenced by social cues, we're swayed by emotion and cognitive biases. Understanding this doesn't make you manipulative, it makes you effective. The difference between ethical influence and manipulation is intent and transparency. If you're using these principles to guide people toward outcomes that genuinely serve their interests, you're being helpful. If you're using them to trick people into decisions that only serve you, you're being manipulative. The goal is to stack principles ethically. You build genuine authority through demonstrated expertise. You create authentic liking through real connection. You leverage honest scarcity through transparent communication about real limitations. You use reciprocity by genuinely helping first. You get commitment through voluntary, meaningful engagement. You show social proof through authentic validation. When all of these align, your influence is both powerful and ethical. Public speaking terrifies most people more than death, but it's also one of the most powerful tools for influence available. The ability to stand in front of a room and deliver ideas that move people to think differently, to feel something, to take action. This skill multiplies your impact in ways one-on-one communication never can, and it's absolutely learnable. The fear doesn't go away completely, but it becomes manageable, and the skill becomes automatic with practice. The first thing you need to understand is that your nervousness is normal and actually helpful. The physiological response you experience, elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, that's your body preparing for peak performance. It's the same response an athlete gets before competition. The problem is most people interpret these signals as panic, which creates a negative spiral. But if you reframe the sensation as excitement, as energy, as your body getting ready to perform, the same physical response becomes an asset instead of a liability. Preparation is the antidote to anxiety. When you know your material inside and out, when you've practiced your delivery, when you've anticipated questions and planned your responses, you have confidence that no amount of positive thinking can replace. Most people vastly underprepare. They think they can wing it or that practicing is for amateurs. This is backwards. Professionals practice more, not less. They run through their presentation multiple times, ideally in the actual space if possible, until the material is second nature. But preparation doesn't mean memorizing a script word for word. That makes you sound robotic and sets you up for disaster if you lose your place. Instead, you want to internalize the structure and key points so deeply that you can deliver them naturally with different wording each time. You know where you're starting, where you're going, what your main points are, and how you're concluding. The exact words can vary. This gives you flexibility while maintaining structure. Your opening is critical. You have seconds to capture attention. Most presentations start weak, with apologies for being nervous, with housekeeping details, with boring introductions. Don't do this. Start strong. A provocative question, a surprising statistic, a relevant story, anything that grabs attention and signals this is worth listening to. The opening sets the tone for everything that follows. A clear structure helps audiences follow you. Tell them where you're going. Today I'm going to cover three main points, then actually cover those points in order, then remind them what you covered. So we've discussed X, Y, and Z. This redundancy helps retention. People remember things they hear multiple times, and knowing the structure helps them organize information as they receive it. Each main point should be supported with evidence, examples, or stories. Abstract claims without support don't land, but a claim followed by data, or illustrated with a story, or made concrete with an example, that sticks. Vary your support. Don't just cite statistics, don't just tell stories. Mix different types of evidence to keep things interesting and appeal to different learning styles. Transitions between points should be clear. Now that we've covered X, let's move to Y. This signposting helps people follow your logic. When you jump between topics without transition, people get lost. When you explicitly mark the movement, they stay with you. This seems obvious, but most presenters skip transitions entirely or make them so subtle that nobody notices. Your conclusion should be as strong as your opening. Summarize your main points briefly, then end with a call to action or a memorable closing thought. Don't trail off. Don't open the floor to questions without a proper close. Don't say, I guess that's everything. Close with power and intention. Your last words are what people remember most. Dealing with nerves in the moment comes down to breath and focus. Before you start, take 3 slow, deep breaths. This physiologically calms your nervous system. During the presentation, if you feel yourself losing control, pause and breathe. Nobody minds the pause. It gives you a moment to reset and gives the audience time to process. Trying to power through when you're spiraling just makes it worse. Focus on your message, not yourself. Most nervous speakers are trapped in their own heads, worried about how they look, what people think, whether they're doing well. This is a self centered focus that amplifies anxiety. Shift your focus outward. You're here to serve the audience, to give them value, to help them understand something. When you're focused on them instead of you, the self consciousness fades. Eye contact in public speaking works the same as in conversation, but scaled up. Don't look over people's heads or at the back wall. Actually make eye contact with individuals. Hold it for a complete thought, then move to someone else. This creates connection even in a large room. People feel like you're speaking to them personally, not reciting at a faceless crowd. Movement should be purposeful. Pacing nervously is distracting. Standing rooted like a statue is stiff. Moving to a new position to mark a transition, stepping forward to emphasize a point. These are intentional uses of space that enhance your message. If you're going to move, do it deliberately. If you're going to stand still, do it fully. Avoid the half movements that signal nervousness. Visual aids should support your message, not replace it. Slides are not your script, they're visual reinforcement of key points. Minimal text, clear graphics, one idea per slide. If you're just reading your slides, why are you there? The audience can read. Your value is in adding context, nuance, examples that go beyond what's on the screen. And for the love of all that's good, do not turn your back to the audience and read off the screen. Handling questions requires its own skill set. First, actually listen to the question. Don't start formulating your answer while they're still talking. If the question is unclear, clarify it before answering. If you don't know the answer, say so and offer to follow up. Don't fake knowledge. If the question is hostile, stay calm and respond to the content without getting defensive. Acknowledge good questions. That's a great point, or I'm glad you brought that up. Shows respect and encourages engagement. Dealing with difficult audience members, the person who won't stop talking, the one who's clearly hostile, the one who asks off topic questions. This requires firm but respectful boundary setting. That's an interesting question, but outside our scope today. I'd be happy to discuss it offline. Or I want to make sure we have time for everyone's questions, so I'm going to move on now. You're in control, you can redirect politely without being rude. Practice in low stakes situations builds skill for high stakes ones. Volunteer to present at team meetings. Join a speaking group like Toastmasters. Record yourself and watch it back. Painful as that is, every rep makes you better. The people who look effortless on stage have done this hundreds of times. You're watching iteration 500. They weren't polished at iteration 5 either. Finally, authenticity matters more than polish. A perfectly delivered but soulless presentation is forgettable. A slightly rough but passionate presentation moves people. Show up as yourself, let your personality come through. If you're naturally funny, use humor. If you're naturally serious, lean into that. Don't try to be someone you're not. The goal is to be the best version of yourself, not a bad impersonation of someone else. Every interaction is a negotiation at some level. You're negotiating how to spend your evening with your partner. You're negotiating deadlines with your boss. You're negotiating roles and responsibilities with your team. Most people are terrible at this because they think negotiation is about winning, about getting everything you want, while the other person gets nothing. But that's not negotiation, that's combat. And it creates resentment, damages relationships, and often blows up agreements that look good on paper. Real negotiation is about finding solutions that work for everyone involved. It's about understanding interests, not just positions. A position is what someone says they want, an interest is why they want it. You might both want the same orange. That's a conflicting position. But if you want the peel for zest and they want the fruit for juice, your interests don't conflict. You can both get what you need. Most negotiations fail because people fight over positions without ever exploring underlying interests. The first step in any negotiation is preparation. What's your goal? What's your best alternative if this negotiation fails? What do you think the other party wants? What's your opening position, your target, and your walkaway point? Most people negotiate without this clarity, which means they accept bad deals or blow up good ones because they're making it up as they go. Knowing your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, is critical. If you don't know your walkaway point, you have no power. Understanding the other side is just as important as knowing your own position. What do they need? What are they worried about? What constraints are they operating under? The more you understand their situation, the better equipped you are to find solutions that work for both of you. This doesn't mean being soft, it means being smart. You can't craft mutually beneficial solutions if you don't understand what benefits them. Framing negotiations as collaborative problem solving rather than adversarial competition changes the entire dynamic. How can we both get what we need is a different conversation than how much can I extract from you. When you approach it as a puzzle to solve together, creativity increases, defensiveness decreases, and better solutions emerge. This is the difference between positional bargaining and interest based negotiation. Active listening is critical in negotiation, maybe more so than anywhere else. You need to really hear what they're saying and what they're not saying. Ask clarifying questions, paraphrase to confirm understanding. The best negotiators talk less and listen more. They gather information that gives them leverage and insight into what's really driving the other party. Every piece of information is potential value you can trade on. Strategic concessions build momentum and reciprocity. When you make a concession, do it deliberately. Make it clear that you're giving something up. Don't just give things away like they don't matter. I can be flexible on timeline if that helps you. Establishes that you're making a sacrifice. This creates pressure for them to reciprocate. Small concessions early build goodwill. Saving concessions for the end can unstick a stuck negotiation. The pattern matters. Bundling losses and unbundling gains is a psychological tactic. People prefer to experience pain all at once and pleasure spread out. So if you're asking for multiple concessions, ask for them together. We need X and Y feels like one request. Asking separately feels like multiple demands. But when you're giving concessions, space them out. Each one feels like a separate gift, amplifying the sense of reciprocity. Anchoring, getting the first number on the table, is powerful but needs to be done right. If you anchor too high in a salary negotiation, you risk offending and ending the conversation. If you anchor too low, you leave money on the table. The sweet spot is ambitious but defensible. You need to be able to explain why your number makes sense. An aggressive anchor backed by reasoning shifts the range in your favor. An arbitrary anchor makes you look unreasonable. Handling conflict effectively is about separating people from problems. When you're in conflict, it's easy to make it personal, to see the other person as the enemy, but usually the conflict is about a specific issue, not about them as a person. I'm frustrated with this situation is different from I'm frustrated with you. Keeping the focus on the problem, not the person, makes resolution possible. Managing your emotional response during conflict is essential. When someone attacks you, criticizes your work, disagrees with your decision, your first instinct is to defend or counterattack. This escalates conflict instead of resolving it. Taking a breath, asking questions to understand their concern, acknowledging valid points even as you disagree with their conclusion. This de escalates. You can be firm about your position while still being respectful of theirs. Finding common ground, especially in conflict, gives you a foundation to build on. Before you address disagreements, establish what you agree on. We both want this project to succeed, or we both value quality. Starting from shared values or goals makes the disagreement feel smaller and the resolution feel more possible. You're on the same team, even if you disagree about tactics. Win win isn't always possible. Sometimes resources are genuinely limited. Sometimes interests genuinely conflict. But it's possible far more often than people assume. Most negotiations have opportunities for creative value creation if you look for them. Different things matter to different people. Finding trades where you give them something low cost to you but high value to them, and vice versa, creates value for both parties. Knowing when to walk away is crucial. Not every deal is worth making. Not every conflict is worth resolving. If the other party is negotiating in bad faith, if they're demanding things that violate your values or your boundaries, if the deal only works for them, you need to be willing to walk. Desperation leads to bad agreements. Confidence in your batonnet gives you the power to say no. After a negotiation, even a difficult one, maintain the relationship if possible. Don't gloat if you got a great deal. Don't hold grudges if things got heated. You might need to work with this person again. Gracious winning and gracious losing both build long term reputation in relationships. How you handle the end of a negotiation matters as much as how you handle the middle. Once you have the fundamentals down, there are advanced techniques that separate adequate communicators from truly exceptional ones. These are the skills that help you navigate complex organizational dynamics, lead through communication, and handle the high stakes situations that define careers. Executive presence is one of those qualities everyone recognizes but few can define. It's the ability to command a room, to speak with authority, to project confidence and competence even under pressure. It's not about being loud or domineering. It's about being grounded, clear, and fully present. People with executive presence don't need to fight for attention. They naturally attract it because they're comfortable with power and responsibility. Developing executive presence starts with owning your space. Physically, this means good posture, appropriate eye contact, and purposeful movement. Vocally, it means speaking clearly without rushing or hedging. Mentally, it means being confident in your expertise while remaining open to input. Emotionally, it means managing your reactions and projecting calm even when you're stressed. All of this takes practice, but it's trainable. Leading through communication requires a different skill set than individual contribution. You're not just sharing your own ideas, you're shaping how a team thinks and acts. This means being clear about vision and direction, creating psychological safety so people speak up, managing group dynamics so discussions stay productive, and synthesizing diverse input into coherent decisions. It's part conductor, part translator, part decision maker. Clarity of vision is the foundation of communication leadership. People need to know where they're going and why it matters. Vague aspirations like be the best mean nothing. Specific, compelling visions that people can see and connect to emotionally, those drive behavior. We're going to reduce customer wait time by 50%, which means thousands of people have better experiences every day, is something people can rally around. It's concrete, it's measurable, it matters. Creating psychological safety, the feeling that it's safe to take risks and speak up without fear of embarrassment or punishment, is critical for high performing teams. This is entirely driven by communication norms. Do leaders respond to bad news by shooting the messenger or by addressing the problem? Do meetings punish honest questions or welcome them? Do people feel heard or dismissed? Small communication choices compound into culture. Managing group dynamics in meetings and discussions is a skill most leaders never develop. They let the loud people dominate. They fail to draw out quiet people who might have valuable input. They let discussions drift off topic without redirecting. They allow personal conflicts to derail substance. Managing dynamics means actively facilitating. Let's hear from people we haven't heard from yet. That's an interesting tangent, but let's table it for now and stay focused on this decision. I'm noticing some tension. Should we address that directly? Difficult conversations with employees, peers, or superiors require courage and skill. The temptation is to avoid them, but unaddressed issues fester. The key is being direct while being respectful, clear about the issue while open to dialogue, firm about standards while compassionate about humanity. This isn't easy. It gets easier with practice, but there's no way around it. Leadership requires having conversations that make everyone uncomfortable. Giving feedback effectively is a core communication skill for leaders. Vague feedback like good job or needs improvement is useless. Specific, behavior focused, timely feedback actually helps people grow. When you interrupted Sarah in the meeting, it shut down her contribution and made the team less likely to share ideas, is actionable. You need to work on your communication skills, isn't. The more specific and timely, the more useful. Receiving feedback, especially from people you lead, requires even more skill. The power dynamic makes people hesitant to be fully honest with you. You need to actively invite feedback, respond non defensively when you get it, and demonstrate that you actually use it to change. What could I have done differently in that situation? Ask genuinely and followed by active listening, builds trust, and gets better information over time. Managing up, communicating effectively with your boss and senior leaders requires understanding their priorities, their communication preferences, and their constraints. Some leaders want detailed updates, others want high level summaries. Some want problems brought with solutions, others want to be part of problem solving. Adapting your communication to their style isn't weakness, it's effectiveness. You don't change what you say, you change how you say it to match their needs. Cross cultural communication is increasingly essential in global work environments. Different cultures have different norms around directness, hierarchy, consensus, time, relationship building, and conflict. What's considered appropriately assertive in one culture can be offensive in another. Humility, curiosity, and willingness to learn are your best tools. Don't assume your norms are universal. Ask questions. Adapt. Crisis communication is its own discipline. When things go wrong, people look to leaders for reassurance and direction. The worst thing you can do is hide or minimize. The best thing you can do is be transparent. Acknowledge what's known and unknown. Take responsibility where appropriate. Explain what's being done, and maintain regular communication. People can handle bad news. They can't handle uncertainty or silence. Influence without authority. Getting things done when you don't have formal power is entirely about communication skill. You can't order people around. You have to persuade them that what you're proposing serves their interest. This means understanding their goals, framing your requests in their language, making it easy for them to say yes, and building relationships before you need favors. People help people they like and trust. Invest in relationship before you need to make withdrawals. Political awareness, understanding the informal power structures and alliances in an organization informs effective communication. Who really makes decisions? Who influences whom? Where are the conflicts? What are the sensitive topics? Navigating this isn't about being manipulative, it's about being realistic. You can have the best idea in the world, but if you present it wrong to the wrong people at the wrong time, it goes nowhere. Knowledge without practice is worthless. You can understand every concept in this guide and still communicate poorly if you don't apply it. The gap between knowing and doing is where most people fail. They read, they nod along, they agree with the principles, and then they go right back to their old habits because changing behavior is hard. But if you're serious about becoming a better communicator, you need a systematic approach to practice and development. Start by assessing where you are. Honestly, record yourself speaking in different contexts: a presentation, a difficult conversation, a casual discussion. Watch it back, as uncomfortable as that is. Notice your verbal tics, your body language, your clarity, your structure. Ask people you trust for honest feedback. What do you do well? Where do you lose people? What habits undermine your message? You can't improve what you don't notice. Set specific goals based on that assessment, not get better at communication. That's too vague. Eliminate filler words by catching myself and pausing instead. Make eye contact with individuals for complete thoughts instead of scanning the room. Ask 3 clarifying questions in every important conversation before offering my perspective. Specific, measurable goals give you something concrete to work on. Practice deliberately in low stakes situations. Every conversation is practice if you treat it that way. You're working on active listening. Practice in your next casual chat. You're working on clear structure. Use it when explaining your weekend plans. You're working on managing your emotional response. Test it in a minor disagreement. The reps add up. You get thousands of opportunities to practice if you're intentional about it. Seek out higher stakes opportunities progressively. Volunteer to present at team meetings. Take on projects that require negotiation. Have the difficult conversations you've been avoiding. Each challenge builds skill. Staying in your comfort zone keeps you stuck. Growth happens at the edge of your capability, where things are hard but doable. Push yourself there regularly. Get feedback after important communications. How did that land? What could I have done better? Where did I lose you? Most people never ask these questions because they're afraid of the answers. But without feedback, you're guessing. Maybe what you thought was clear was confusing. Maybe what you thought was persuasive was off putting. You won't know unless you ask. Study great communicators, watch speeches, presentations, interviews, not to copy them, but to notice what they do. How do they structure arguments? How do they use their voice and body? How do they handle tough questions? What makes their communication effective? Break it down, learn from it, adapt it to your style. Work with a coach if possible. An experienced communication coach can spot issues you'd never see, provide targeted exercises to build specific skills, and hold you accountable for practice. The return on investment is enormous. Even a handful of sessions can accelerate your development dramatically, and it doesn't have to be a formal coach, a mentor, a colleague. Anyone who communicates well and is willing to give you honest feedback can help. Create accountability structures. Tell people you're working on specific skills and ask them to notice. I'm trying to stop interrupting. Can you call me on it when I do? Having people watching creates positive pressure to actually change, and their observations give you valuable feedback on whether your efforts are working. Reflect systematically after important communications. What went well? What didn't? Why? What would you do differently next time? This reflection cements learning. Without it, experiences are just events. With it, they become lessons. A journal where you track communication challenges and insights accelerates development significantly. Common mistakes to avoid. Don't try to change everything at once. Focus on 1 or 2 specific skills at a time until they become automatic. Then move on to others. Don't beat yourself up when you fail. You will fail a lot. That's learning. The question isn't whether you'll mess up, it's whether you'll extract the lesson and improve. Don't wait until you feel ready. You'll never feel fully ready. Start practicing now with the skills you have, and they'll develop through use. Another mistake is practicing in your head instead of out loud. Thinking about speaking is not the same as speaking. Imagining a conversation is not the same as having it. You need reps with actual vocal production, actual audience feedback, actual stakes. Mental rehearsal has value, but it's not a substitute for real practice. Also, avoid the trap of focusing only on areas you're already good at. It feels good to do things you're good at. It's uncomfortable to work on weaknesses, but growth requires addressing gaps. If you're great at logical argumentation but terrible at emotional connection, you need to work on emotional connection, even though it's harder. Well rounded communicators don't have glaring weaknesses that undermine their strengths. Continuous learning keeps skills fresh. Communication evolves, new research emerges, different contexts require different approaches. Read books on communication, persuasion, leadership. Take courses. attend workshops, join speaking groups. Stay curious about how communication works and how you can do it better. The moment you think you've mastered it is the moment you stop growing. Finally, integrate what you learn into your identity. You're not someone who's trying to get better at communication. You're someone who communicates effectively. That subtle shift in how you see yourself changes behavior. When communication skill is part of who you are, not just something you're working on, you show up differently. You hold yourself to higher standards. You practice consistently because that's what people like you do. The path from where you are to where you want to be requires consistent, deliberate effort over time. There are no shortcuts, but the payoff is enormous. Every interaction becomes more effective. Every relationship strengthens. Every goal becomes more achievable. The investment in developing communication skills returns dividends for the rest of your life. You've just absorbed a comprehensive framework for thinking clearly, speaking powerfully, and influencing effectively. But here's the truth: none of this matters if you don't use it. Information without implementation is just entertainment. You can know every principle, every technique, every strategy we've covered, and if you walk away and do nothing differently, you've wasted your time. The gap between knowing and doing is where most people fail. They consume content, they nod along, they agree with everything, and then they go right back to their old patterns. Don't be that person. Decide right now, before you move on to the next thing, what you're going to do differently. Which conversation are you going to approach differently? Which communication habit are you going to break? Which new technique are you going to practice today? Start small. You don't need to master everything immediately. Pick one area. Maybe it's asking more questions and listening better. Maybe it's eliminating filler words. Maybe it's making stronger eye contact. Choose something specific and commit to practicing it until it becomes automatic. Then add the next skill and the next. Over time, these small changes compound into dramatic transformation in how you communicate and how people respond to you. Remember that communication is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or ill. The principles we've covered, the psychology of influence, the techniques of persuasion, all of this can be weaponized to manipulate people. But that's not the path. That's short term thinking that destroys trust in relationships. Use these skills ethically. Influence people toward outcomes that genuinely serve their interests. Build your credibility through consistent integrity. Create win win solutions that actually work for everyone involved. That's how you build lasting influence and a reputation that opens doors. Understand that becoming a great communicator is a journey, not a destination. You're never done. There's always something to improve, a new context to navigate, a more challenging conversation to handle. But each step forward gives you more capability, more confidence, more impact. The investment you make in these skills pays dividends forever. Better relationships, more opportunities, greater influence, the ability to create change in the world around you. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel ready. Start practicing now. Have that conversation you've been avoiding. Give that presentation you've been putting off. Negotiate for what you're worth. Speak up in the meeting. Share your ideas with clarity and conviction. The discomfort you feel is growth happening. Lean into it. And remember this: every person who seems like a natural communicator, every leader who commands rooms effortlessly, every speaker who moves audiences with ease, they all started where you are now. Uncertain, imperfect, still learning. What separates them is not natural talent, it's 10,000 hours of practice, of failing, of getting feedback, of trying again. They built the skill through repetition and reflection. You can do the same. Your thoughts matter, your ideas matter, your voice matters, but only if you can communicate them effectively, only if you can think with clarity, speak with power, and influence with integrity. That's what you've learned here. That's what you now have the tools to do. The question is, will you use them? This is your moment. Take what you've learned and put it into practice. Watch what happens when you show up to conversations differently. Notice how people respond when you speak with clarity and conviction. Feel the shift when you influence ethically and effectively. This isn't theory anymore. This is your new reality. Make it count. If this video helped you see communication differently, if it gave you tools you can actually use, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It tells me this content is valuable and it helps other people find it. Subscribe to the channel because we're diving deep into topics like this all the time, giving you the strategies and insights that actually move the needle in your life. And drop a comment telling me which technique you're going to try first. I rate every comment and I want to know what's clicking for you. Now go out there and communicate like the professional you're becoming. Think clearly, speak powerfully, influence ethically. The world needs what you have to say. Make sure they hear it.